Now I am recording on this session, but how are you doing, Angela? How's things going in this?
It's going well. I'm feeling better and better about my studies.
Good. All right.
This time last year, I was very insecure, and I find myself thinking about it when I'm in the shower, if I'm driving my car, just subconsciously thinking, how can I do that a little better? So I feel like I'm getting it.
Good. That's the idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, what we're going to do here today is finish off the course. This is it. This class, this particular Zoom session is the last one in 240 for this semester.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's mainly covering chapter 10 in my book, Compression for Clinicians.
Okay,
The topic is on ADRO. Yep, in that there weird pink and white book. It's a pinko commie book. It's gone so far left, it's left America. There you go. The last chapter in that book is, ironically enough, on a linear hearing aid. So the whole book is called Compression for Clinicians. But as you start reading the chapter, you'll see me describing the chapter as the Tabasco of the book. It's just kind of like the whole book is on compression, and here I end the book on a linear hearing aid. Right. And I'm doing so because ADRO is sold by Sam's Club. So anybody who applies to work at Sam's Club in their hearing centers, it's called hearing, in the States they call it Hearing Lab Technologies, HLT. And they actually wanted me to present it at AAA, the American Academy of Audiology, this coming March in Columbus, Ohio. But I just got word today that that I submitted a talk to do for them, for ADRO, for Sam's Club. It got turned down, so I'm not going after all. But I just found that out today, ironically enough. ADRO is interesting. ADRO stands for Adaptive Dynamic Range Optimization. Now, there's a mouthful for you, but I would memorize what that acronym stands for. Adaptive Dynamic Range. Well, dynamic range is easy. You heard that one all the time. So put adaptive in front of it, and then the O is optimization. Now, what the world does that mean? It's interesting. I learned about it years ago, and it's been around for years, but it was used in cochlear implants. And it was invented in Australia, Melbourne, Australia, by a guy named Peter Blamey, as in I blame you, Blamey, B-L-A-M-E-Y. And there's also a woman, Lois Martin. And these two are, Blamey is an engineer, and Lois Martin, I believe, is an audiologist. But they came up with this thing called ADRO. And it was used in cochlear implants first, and then it began to be used in hearing aids. He tried to sell it to various manufacturers, and nobody really bought into it except Sam's Club. So that's where it's sold. So if you work at Sam's Club, you're going to see probably videos that I've done for ADRO, for these guys, on their product. And it's a very unique, I've never seen anything quite like it. I'll be honest with you, I've never actually listened to it either. But it is an interesting product, and a lot of people who've worn hearing aids before really like the sound. So what I'm going to do in this Zoom session is just going to give a cursory overview as to what ADRO is and how it works. Okay? Here we go. Let's share the screen. Okay. Now, over here, PowerPoint. So here it is. We've talked lots on compression, but is linear gain so bad? Not really, as long as it isn't saturating or peak clipping. Now, really kind of take a look at what those words mean, saturating or peak clipping. Let's see if I can show it to you here. We'll just show it to you, see if I've got something on, see a picture showing linear gain. Remember linear way back when we talked about it way at the beginning of the semester? And I'll just show you this picture. I'll make it a little bit bigger. And you're looking at linear gain here. Pick this leftmost blue line. And linear means, okay, for example, this hearing aid is a 50 decibel linear gain hearing aid, okay? So 0 in, 50 out. 20 in, 70 out. 40 in, 90 out. 60 in, 110 out. So the gain is always 50, always 50, always 50. And then I said in linear gain, then when you hit the maximum output of the hearing aid, then you hit what they call peak clipping. And the hearing aid sounded terrible. Okay, so now you're saturating because you didn't want any more than 120, let's say, to come out. So now it's hitting the cement ceiling. Remember that discussion way back in linear hearing aids? Okay, now I'm going to go to the first slide again. As long as linear gain isn't hitting peak clipping, as long as it's not doing that, it sounds really nice, clean, and crisp. Unlike compression, which has knee points, ratios, attack release times, all these together in separate channels in a digital hearing aid can cause distortion. So various companies, and one of them actually is Oticon, has gone back to kind of using linear gain a little bit. And they use linear processing. The ADRO tries to use it as much as possible. In other words, not just below some knee point or between two knee points, but almost always, unless output is inaudible or unless the output is too loud. So here we go. Everyone offers wide dynamic range compression, and you've seen this graph 1,000 times, okay? Normal loudness growth, the red line. Impaired loudness growth, the light blue line. Hearing aids have to amplify soft sounds by a lot and loud sounds by little or nothing at all. Blah, blah, blah. The floor is elevated, the ceiling isn't. Here's recruitment. Here's where things join. Both normal hearing and hearing loss here with 100 dB as too loud. So what does it say in the white writing here? Gives, WDRC gives most amplification to soft sounds and less amplification to average sounds and still less to loud sounds. Okay, we've done that, got the t-shirt. Okay? Now, here I got some crazy thing appearing on my screen here. Thanks a lot for this explanation. Is there a way to get, I'll have to see who the heck that is. I have no idea. I don't know if you see that or not, Angela, on my screen. This little thing here on the bottom right. I have no idea. Anyway, ADRO offers a different solution. Linear gain. Provide more, but here's what they do. They provide more linear gain for soft inputs, less linear gain for louder inputs, but they use built-in rules when to change the linear gain, and it avoids the necessity of peak clipping. Read what it says here. ADRO concentrates on the average loudness of conversational speech. In other words, in the middle of the input speech dynamic range, not the whole range. Here it says, not the whole rangy, not the whole range. This is where the most cues for understanding speech are located. ADRO changes its amount of linear gain over time depending on rules. And the desired result, place the output into the listener's dynamic range. And that's why it's called adaptive dynamic range optimization. I'll read the paragraph again. ADRO concentrates on the average loudness, not all of the speech, just the middle of it. And the middle of the input speech dynamic range, not the whole range. And I'll show you what that means in a picture. This is where most cues for understanding speech are located. ADRO keeps changing its amount of linear gain to more linear gain or less linear gain, but by gum, it's always linear. And it changes its amount of linear gain over time depending on built-in rules that it follows. And the desired result, it always places the output into the listener's dynamic range. That's why it's called adaptive dynamic range optimization. Here's speech sounds on an audiogram. Note how vowels and voiced sounds are relatively loud and low-pitched, while unvoiced consonants that I'm circling over here are soft and high-pitched. So English has 5 vowels. Every word has a vowel. We have thousands of words. So vowels don't define words. They don't tell you what the word was. It's the high-pitched consonants that tell you what the word is. For example, cat, hat, fat, bat, sat, chat, or tin, fin, sin, thin, chin. ADRO preserves this natural relationship It preserves that. Look at what WDRC does to speech. Here's the top waveform. This could be, my father can beat your father at checkers, or is that cake you're eating very tasty? Or what's the weather like in Kansas City, Missouri today? Okay, and that's what this waveform is on the top. That's that's the input. So the top sound wave represents an example of a sentence spoken at an average conversational loudness level. The peaks are the louder parts of speech, namely the vowels. The valleys are the soft parts of speech, namely the unvoiced consonants, like s. Now, aided speech, here's what WDRC does. Remember what we said WDRC does. I'm going to go back here and have a look at it. It amplifies soft sounds by a lot and loud sounds by less. So what's it going to do to input speech? It's going to amplify the soft parts by a lot. Look where my cursor is. And the loud parts by less. So what are you going to get with WDRC is the bottom. It made the peaks a little bit bigger, but it made the valleys way bigger. So what happened in this bottom sound is the peak to valley contrast is not as big anymore. Look at the top one. The peak to valley contrast is there, but WDRC does the bottom one because it amplifies the loud parts by less and it amplifies the soft parts by more. So the peak to valley contrasts are diminished. Do you see what I'm saying there? Now watch what ADRO does, because ADRO's different because it's using linear gain. Here we go. ADRO does this. Here's the same input speech as here. The top unaided speech is identical between this slide and this slide. Only instead of talking about what WDRC does to speech, let's talk about what ADRO does to speech. The peak to valley contrasts are bigger. Look at the bottom one. Now look at what ADRO does. How come? Because it's providing linear gain. And what's linear gain? The same gain for all inputs. So the same gain for a whisper as for average. As for louder, it's giving the same gain for all inputs. WDRC is giving more gain to soft inputs and progressively less and less gain for louder inputs. So because the peaks here are louder, WDRC isn't amplifying them by much. Because the valleys are softer, WDRC is amplifying the hell out of those. So the peak to valley contrasts are gone. Whereas with ADRO, the peak to valley contrasts are preserved. And that's why the proponents of ADRO say speech sounds clearer with ADRO. That's what the proponents are all saying. So here's speech waveform, and here's speech spectrum. Okay? The peak to peak is about 30 decibels, and seen as a spectrum, the top and the bottom are about 30 dB as well. So this is speech waveform versus speech spectrum. ADRO does adaptive dynamic range optimization. Read what it says here. A digital algorithm that started with cochlear implants and now is used in some hearing aids. Typical compression. Gain is adjusted with fixed knee points and ratios. ADRO doesn't do that. ADRO does something very different. It uses fixed rules. It uses fixed rules. Here's the rules. There's two of them. Now, let's see if I can blow that up and make it bigger here. Audibility. And the last one is comfort. If 30% of the aided outputs are softer than some predetermined level, increase the linear gain. If 10% of the aided outputs are too loud, reduce the gain. So read those bottom two again. Up to 30% of aided outputs can be softer than some predetermined audibility level. If more than 30% of the aided outputs hitting your eardrum are too soft, increase the linear gain. 90% of all aided outputs better be below your loudness discomfort level. If 90% of aided outputs are not below your loudness discomfort level, ADRO says reduce the linear gain. So it's very clear, what I want to make very clear is there's two rules. One's the audibility rule, one's the comfort rule. So they bink in your audiogram into the computer, they program the hearing aid, it's all done by computer, and it has two rules. And so for your hearing loss versus my hearing loss, the particular levels at which these rules are applied would be different because it depends on what your hearing loss is. But ADRO doesn't use now, doesn't use fitting methods. It's fit entirely on a subjective, how do you like that sound? It's really weird. It's a totally different approach, but we'll get there later. So what it's doing is, so you bink in a mild to moderate loss, you find out what's too loud, you find out what's too soft, and then you set the rules. Okay, so if 30% of the aided outputs hitting my eardrum are below my audibility, increase the linear gain. 90% of my aided outputs better be below my uncomfortable loudness level. If they're not, reduce the linear gain. But by gum, the gain is always linear. It's either more linear gain or less linear gain. But the hearing aid is always delivering linear gain. That's the thing of ADRO. It's always using linear gain. And it's just changing the amount of linear gain according to two rules, an audibility rule and a comfort rule. And that's essentially ADRO. So it's never using compression. It doesn't believe in it. So the minimum linear gain is always going to be the same for your hearing loss as opposed to mine. And the maximum linear gain it's going to give is going to be different for you than it is for me because it's based on your hearing levels. But nonetheless, it's always going to be giving you more or less linear gain. And it's really different. Here, let's see what it looks like on a picture. So we'll go back to share screen. Ooh. So ADRO shown on an input-output function. There you go. There's the blue lines. It's either giving more linear gain or less linear gain. Read what it says here again. Note that a shift to the right actually shows a decrease in linear gain. Now we can follow this. Let's watch this. Take 60 dB input. Let's look at the rightmost line. 60 dB input. 90 dB output. What's my gain there? 30. 90 minus 60 is 30. Now let's look at the leftmost diagonal line and look at 60 input. 60 in here is 110 out. So 110 minus 60 is 50. So this is obviously the more gain than this one is. Remember that discussion from early on in the semester. The rightmost diagonal line represents the less gain. The leftmost diagonal line always represents the most. And to understand that, don't worry about it. Just take a chill pill, take a Zen Buddhism pill, and let the graph tell you the story. 60 in, look at the rightmost line. 60 in here is 90 out. That's a gain of 30. Look at the leftmost diagonal line. 60 in is 110 out here. I guess that's a gain of 50. That's what the graph is saying. Okay, read the top. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Greater and lesser amounts of linear gain are provided. The right and left blue diagonal lines, depending on the listener's sound environments. In loud environments, less linear gain. In soft environments, more linear gain. The focus is the listener's comfort. So here's the rule seen as a statistic. Don't freak, but we'll look at it. dB/SPL output level in some channel. Percent of time that the dB output was at some level. So most of the time, follow my cursor, most of the time, the dB output in some particular channel was at this level. Most of the time, okay? The audibility boundary is here. If 30% of the time the output is too soft, increase the linear gain. 90% of the time, this red here all the way to here, 90% of the time, the output better be below your uncomfortable loudness level. If it's not, reduce the gain. So there's your audibility rule and your comfort rule. And they're acting like two posts on a football field. Okay? Behave output. If you're too soft, increase the linear gain. If you're too loud, decrease the linear gain. So ADRO, and you're looking at here, typical WDRC. Now watch the top one. This is the boring one. This is what typical WDRC is. Remember? Low knee point, low ratio, linear gain, knee point, low knee point, 2-to-1 compression ratio. Been there, got the frickin' t-shirt, okay? Once adjusted, they're fixed. With input changes, gain only follows the function. Soft inputs are given the most gain. Average inputs, the hearing aid is in a weak degree of compression. Saw that. But here's the bottom. Look at what ADRO does. It looks like a big square kind of tipped over on the side. As the inputs are soft, yep, linear gain. And if the inputs increase, all of a sudden, give less linear gain. If the inputs get softer and softer and softer, more linear gain again. The inputs are too soft, more linear, so less linear. If the inputs get too loud, less linear gain. If the inputs are soft, more linear gain. But by gum, the gain is always linear. So it's always switching between two amounts of linear gain. We'll read what it says here. Here's the comfort boundary. There's the audibility boundary. Linear gain unless the criteria are violated. For example, 40 dB gain until 90% of the output exceeds the comfort level, then you better reduce. And all of a sudden, boom, now you're given only 25 dB gain until 30% of the output becomes inaudible. Whoop, then you'll flip up back to 40 again. So it's either changing between 25 or 40 dB, but the gain is always linear. So here's a multi-Kneepoint input-output function. This is what Audiogram does. It's doing this, remember? It's giving linear gain for slightly louder than average inputs. This is to answer that question, oh, I hear people talking at tables far away better than I hear people close up. And this was the answer of what most hearing aid companies are doing. Audiogram was the first to lead. And this is called speech guard. And that's, you could look it up, Google up speech guard Audiogram, and you'll see this. This is exactly what they're going to tell you. We give linear gain for slightly louder than average input levels. The level that you would be talking to in a loud restaurant. The level that you would be sitting 3 feet away from me at a table in a noisy restaurant is going to be slightly more than 65 dB SPL. It's probably going to be 75. That's what I mean by slightly greater than average. So this is the approach that most hearing aid companies are using to address that question. So yes, they are going back to using linear gain, but nobody's using it like ADRO is. So that's the difference. ADRO's unique fitting approach. Oh, look at this. You got hearing lab technology. There it is. Okay, there it is. I made these slides for them. Now get this, the fitting methods are used by the competition. Now 2, now 1, DSL5, you heard of all of those. ADRO has a completely different approach. You're having the hearing aid sitting in your ear, and the listener makes loudness judgments with the hearing aids in the ears. The client makes loudness judgments, finds the loudness for 4 adjacent frequency chimes that are played out of the hearing aids. And you place all 4 of those at a comfortable, preferred listening level. And then you make sure that the loudness is balanced between the ears. So here you go. You'll have a low frequency, a higher frequency, a higher one, a higher one, a higher one, and they'll equalize the loudness for all of these progressively high frequencies, and they do that inside a quiet sound booth. And for one ear, they'll make A, B, and C equally loud, and then they'll make C, D, and E equally loud, and then they'll balance the loudness between the ears, making sure everything is even Steven. And then these loudness judgments are used to set. And don't feel you have to memorize this. Please don't. I'm just taking you on a tour. This is just a tour. We're having fun today. I'm just talking, yakking, okay? I'm never going to ask any of this stuff on an exam. Don't be ridiculous. I'd have to look it up in my PowerPoint to see what the answers were myself. I just want students to realize that there is a hearing aid out there that, as Monty Python used to say, is completely different. Okay, that's what I'm talking about here. So the loudness judgments that we played around over here with these chimes are used to find out what's the maximum output level you want, what's your comfort target, what's your audibility target. So look at the green and the yellow. You're establishing these two posts. That's what you're doing, okay? So that's what you're doing there. And then you're setting what's your maximum gain you want, maximum output level, your comfort target, your audibility target. And the comfort target is the leader. Now, the MPO is for hearing protection, protects against sudden loud sounds. The comfort target is the leader. It predicts the maximum power output, and it predicts the audibility target. So this one's the main thing, and it sets the yellow and the red together. This is just the way they make it work. And then the maximum gain sets the maximum gain in each particular frequency channel. Some words about this stuff, forget it. ADRO compares the output level with comfort and audibility targets in each frequency channel. So you got real loud, barely audible, the listener's dynamic range, and what you're doing is here's the hearing aid output range. ADRO comfort rule will decrease the output level if a channel, if something's coming out that exceeds your loudness tolerance more than 10% of the time. In other words, 90% had better be below your UCL. Audibility rule will increase the linear gain in a channel if it falls below audibility for 30% of the time. WDRC becomes complicated. Listen to this now. We're taking it home. It provides greatest amplification for soft sounds, and we've seen that because it does that, it distorts the input sound waves, makes the peak to valley contrasts less. WDRC has a fixed knee point and a fixed compression ratio. Sound environments, however, change constantly over time, and WDRC has to rely on various programs to overcome these difficulties. And this introduces more complexity, more handheld devices, more client frustration. I'll talk in English. WDRC is like wearing a suit of armor by a knight. Clank, 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 fixed knee point, fixed compression ratio, and in listening environments changing whatever, and those rules are going to be applied. If the sound's below this knee point, it's linear gain. If it's more than this, you're 2-to-1 compression. And you know what compression does? It decreases the peak to valley contrasts, because wide dynamic range is amplifying soft sounds by a lot and loud sounds by less. So the peak to valley contrasts in the waveform are diminished. ADRO doesn't do that. But anyway, sticking back to WDRC, because it is like a knight in armor and not always shining, okay, it's just clink, clink. You've got to rely on different programs. Listening and quiet program, listening and noise program, music program, telephone program. So now the listener's got to be wearing, a remote control and something else now. And you talk about your 75, 80-year-old people that can't handle that crap. I mean, they're looking at all these accessories that are coming with the hearing aid. Why not cut the problem off at the pass? Use always linear gain and use either more or less according to an audibility or a comfort rule. And when you've got clearer speech, when you've got better peak to valley contrasts, you won't have to rely on all these programs. You won't have to rely as much on gadgets. You just won't have to mess with that crap. And many people who've worn normal hearing aids, digital hearing aids, and then have gone to Sam's Club and have tried ADRO, a lot of these people are going, yeah, it's better. I like it. A lot of people like it. I don't know. I'm not getting paid by ADRO a dime, Okay, this isn't it. I just want listeners to be aware that there is an entirely unique and different strategy out there. And it comes from the land down under. All right. Stood 6 foot tall and full of muscles. Because I come from the land down under. Keep your daytime job, Ted. Okay, anyhow. So, buttons and become a tailor. See if I can make, there you go. Here's programmable frequency responses. This is what you got to rely on when you're using typical digital hearing aids to address difficult, different listening situations. And you've seen this picture before in past units in this course. ADRO, it says at the bottom, doesn't distort input sound waves with compression. And so it doesn't have to rely as much on different programs. Now, here's a way of looking at it. Here's a room full of people. Okay? The pictures speak louder than words. Pictures talk louder than words. So here's a group of people. Actually, this is Peter Blamey, the inventor of ADRO. And this is a bunch of people who live in vans down by the river. So now, the reduced dynamic range with sensory neural hearing loss does this. Look at the picture. The person, okay, I'm literally cutting off the bottom. Instead of this, instead of hearing from 0 to 100, the person with sensory neural loss now hears from 50 to 100. Okay, so the reduced dynamic range. The listener can't hear the bottom, softer half of the input sound. The floor of hearing sensitivity is elevated, while the ceiling of loudness tolerance is unchanged. So, normal hearing, impaired hearing. WDRC does this. Okay, it lifts the bottom and puts it into the top. It takes this, and because the listener's hearing loss does this, WDRC compensates by doing this. And look at the distortion. Look at how the picture is squeezed. Because you're lifting the bottom half and you're bringing it up here. So you've squeezed the picture. Normal is this. Sensory neural loss does this. WDRC does this. Notice the top here never changed from here to here. But the picture's now distorted. ADRO does this. Now look at the difference. The top part is, the bottom part of the picture is gone. Okay, see how you can see the legs of her chair way down here? ADRO, instead of the hearing loss causes this, so WDRC does this, it takes all of it, you can still see the back of her chair, that leg. ADRO does this. So it's looking at the middle part of the input of speech, not all of it. See how at the top, look at this white part here. That's visible here, and the leg of her chair is here. ADRO says, let's concentrate on the middle part, because that's the most important part of hearing the speech, right here. Let's concentrate on the table that's in the middle. So when sensory neural loss does this, WDRC does this. Notice you can see the leg on her chair, plus still the white up here. ADRO instead does this. So you're leaving just the middle. So it's concentrating on the middle part of incoming speech to the mic, not the top and not the bottom. In other words, and I'll show you on another slide, Angela, so you'll see it clearly here, because I'm a big believer in making this make sense to you. So we'll go over to, I'll hit escape here, okay, and I'll go to this slide here. I'm going to go up here, and to this slide. See, this is the speech spectrum. And if you're looking at the speech spectrum, ADRO isn't trying to keep all of where my cursor is here, and ADRO isn't trying to keep all of where my cursor is here. ADRO's focusing on the middle, this part. And it's giving linear gain to the middle part. That's what I meant by those end pictures. Okay? So ADRO's focusing on the middle part of speech, And instead of lifting the bottom by a lot and the top by less, so now you got a distorted picture. You got still the picture, but it's distorted. So you can look at this picture as being the peak to valley contrasts are not really there anymore. ADRO is saying, forget that. Let's just concentrate on the middle, and that way you don't have the distortion. It places the most important part of sound input so that it fits into the listener's reduced dynamic range. And this is, of course, the listener's reduced dynamic range. So instead of doing this, it's doing this. That's the end of the presentation. Now, I can show, there's another thing I can share with you, and that is, this is an article, and you have this as well. Okay, this is a PDF article. Can you see this writing here, Angela? Okay, and it's an article that I wrote a few years ago, and it's kind of summarizing what we've talked about right here. And as you scroll down, you'll see the same pictures we looked at. Here, I'll scroll up a little bit over here. Okay, you saw this picture here. Here you see typical WDRC does that. ADRO does this instead. Mobetta. So it's really essentially showing you the same similar PowerPoint slides, but there's writing all around it. And so it's kind of what I got my chapter from. Chapter 10 in my book also has a lot of these same diagrams, showing you again waveform versus the spectrum of speech. ADRO is concentrating more on the middle part. So all of that stuff. And then it talks about how it's fit. It's subjective stuff with those speech with those chimes, those different frequencies. So basically, there's the rules. So it's just giving you a whole, there's its weird input-output function, that box all leaned over. So, but again, here I show it in Icelandic. Look at this. I went to Iceland one time, and I used the same kind of slides as what they did in their article. Here's a normal input dynamic range. So I took a picture of the Icelandic instructions in front of my seat on the airplane flying to Iceland. And it says, your seat is blah, blah, blah in Icelandic, and after you have sat down, it's called blah, blah, blah. So here's a normal dynamic range. Scroll down, there's sensory neural loss. Can't you see the bottom part? Here's what WDRC does. Okay, it's showing you, oops, distorted. Whereas ADRO does this. Concentrates on the middle part, not trying to lift everything, all of this and this here. It's concentrating instead on amplifying the center part of speech and using no compression, using linear only. So now it's concentrating on that middle portion. So I just showed the same kind of slides as what they did. And if you look at my book in chapter 10, you'll see these slides as opposed to these slides here. But they're showing the same thing. Okay? Yeah, well, that's my little sermonette on ADRO. Shorter session than usual, but I hope it'll serve as somewhat of a bit of an introduction to ADRO. Don't think people have to memorize anything, but you should know what ADRO stands for. You should know comfort boundary, what the rule is, and audibility boundary, what the rule is, and just know that basically you're shifting greater or lesser amounts of linear gain, but by gum, the gain always stays linear. And you're focusing on the middle part of speech input to the mic, not all the range of speech, but the most important part. So they say it results in less need for all these programs, less need for gadgets, less need. So, well, if you go to Sam's Club and you ever work over there, that's the kind of hearing aid you'll be fitting. All right? Now, I don't know if people in the class, let's see, would like a review in this course, would like a review. When's your final, Angela? Do you know?
Let's see. Gosh, I don't know. I would say it probably opens maybe on the 8th or 10th of December, probably closes on the 15th to 17th.
Makes sense. So then the review should, of course, then be before the 8th.
Yes.
Henry the 8th I am. Henry the 8th I am. I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before. All right, so anyhow, I don't know what got me off on that one. And everyone was a Henry. It's an old song from when I was a kid. I used to be on the radio. Anyway, so we can have a review. I understand a lot of people had problems on the midterm with the input-output functions. You know, a hearing aid is doing this. What's the gain? Now, the knee point is this, the output is this, what was, blah, blah, blah. A lot of people had problems on that. Many people did. And it's because people weren't drawing the input-output functions that I told people to do. I said, hint, drawing the input-output functions for these questions will really help you. So if I have a review, I would be happy to show a few of those so that in case we have any of those on the final, it'll work. Okay? So that's the idea. So Lynn and I are talking about revising the final to make it work for everybody. But I'll find out from her as to whether people want review session or not, and we can set that up. I'll email everybody accordingly. Okay?
Sounds good. Will we not have a Zoom session next Tuesday?
Not likely unless it's a review.
Okay.
You know, there you go. It could be a review, but you know what? People don't tend to show. I'd like to have a review when people show up.
Yes. Well, if nobody shows, I probably have like 15 questions.
Good. Well, you know what? I'll go in and hold this. I'll hold the review. Today's the 20th.
Yep.
Next week's the 27th. I'll show up, same as usual. Okay?
Okay. At 2 o'clock?
Yep, 2 o'clock.
Okay. If anything changes, I'm very flexible.
Okay.
I can meet with you.
Yeah, it's 1:30 Pacific time, so I think it's going to be 11:30 Central time, right? You guys are earlier than me.
Yes, I am.
So we started this session at 11:30 Central time. No, what time is it by you? You're later. You're ahead of me.
Yeah. Yeah, 3:30 to 4:30.
Correct.
Right now, I'm at 4:15.
Yeah, so that's right, and I'm at 2:15 right now. So that's what it is. I'm 2 hours behind you. 2 hours behind you. So we'll hold the Zoom session next week, same time as usual, same channel. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for your help.
Hey, that's what it's all about.
Right.
Okay. Live long and prosper, and we'll see you all when we look at you.
Sounds good, buddy.
All right.